O great spirit of the light, mother that nourishes plants, come to me.
Hello everyone, and welcome! My name is John Turner, and I'm very pleased you've decided to join me. Let me ask you something. Do you like fantasy? Want to go on an adventure? If so, then tonight, we're here to celebrate a classic Japanese animated series, which happens to be both. It's called Record of Lodoss War. And so tonight's panel is known as Record of Lodoss War, 30 Years of Dungeons and Dragons. This anime series, incidentally, is more than just an escapist swords and sorcery fantasy. It also happens to carry an interesting legacy with it. And over the next hour, I invite you to join me as we go exploring the history behind Lodoss. In case you're not at all familiar with Record of Lodoss War, its storyline goes something like this. Long ago, two powerful goddesses, Marfa the Earth Mother and Cardus the Destroyer, clashed in a vicious duel which culminated with a new land broken away from the continent of Alacrast. It is called Lodoss. In the years since then, Lodoss has come to be known as the Accursed Island, and it lives up to its name, for it is a place where danger can happen anywhere, even at a royal party. It also suffered from years of war, and as this tale unfolds, a new clash is about to explode on this island. In the midst of this conflict, 6 adventurers cross paths, forced to participate in the ensuing chaos. The hero of our story is Parn, a reckless but passionate warrior who dreams of being a hero and is determined to redeem his father's disgraced legacy.
I won't be beaten!
His best friend, Ato, a cleric from the kingdom of Valas, is loyal to him every step of the way and treats his wounds whenever he can.
Looks like our adventure is just starting up.
Then there's Steentlet, a high elf who has a crush on Parn and will do anything to show it. She also happens to be a very skillful fighter and summoner of elemental spirits to help our heroes.
The world is full of people who'll get you from behind. Let me handle them. You keep your eyes on what's ahead.
Also along for the ride is Gim, a gruff, tough old dwarf with an axe to grind and a mission to bring back Lelia, daughter of a shrine priestess who disappeared years ago. On occasion, he even trains Parn on his sword fighting skills.
Pathetic. You can hardly even handle a sword.
Whoa! Ah!
Don't worry. Gim has assured me he's being quite gentle with your friend.
Slain, a wise sorcerer, accompanies Gim on his quest, while always ready to use his magic should the occasion rise.
To my staff, I call the power of light.
And of course, there's that rascally thief, Woodchuck, who gets into one scrape after another.
Be a pal and let me out of here, would you? No more stealing, I promise.
Together, these companions join forces with King Fawn from Valas.
I never thought I'd meet the son of Theseus.
As well as Cashew, King of the Desert Kingdom Flame.
There is honor in all that you do.
To defend their homeland from the evil forces of the Dark Island, Marmo, and their leader, the wicked Emperor Beld.
Fawn, I haven't forgotten you these past 30 years. Next will be your Valas.
Beld is aided by 2 accomplices with similar diabolical ambitions. Ashram, the ruthless Black Knight, is unflinchingly loyal to his master and eventually becomes Parn's most dangerous rival.
You should know, a sword is not a toy.
Pirotess, a dark elf, harbors feelings for this Black Knight and will do anything to earn his affection.
For the conquest of Lodoss, my lord.
And then there's the dark wizard Vognard, who, like most villains of his kind, exerts absolute domination over everyone.
After I unleash the wrath of Cardus, then the powers of the gods are mine!
Behind the scenes is a shadowy figure, Carla, a mysterious witch who manipulates everyone like pawns in a dangerous chess game so as to satisfy her own twisted agenda.
Lodoss will be neither unified nor conquered.
Thankfully, the great sage Wart may be able to help our heroes in some way.
I feel all of Lodoss trembling.
All this unfolds over the course of 13 episodes, setting the stage for a dramatic showdown for control of all Lodoss. From this description, you might assume that Record of Lodoss War aspires to include all of the elements you'd expect in any fantasy adventure story, and you're absolutely right. Heroes? Check. Villains? Check. Swordplay? Check. Dragons? Check. Elves? Check. Monsters? Check. Magic? Check. Quests? Check. The list goes on and on. As mentioned before, though, this series also features an archive of interesting records, no pun intended, concerning its history. And now, it's time to begin our journey.
Shall we be off then, Sir Knight?
Attempts to create animated fantasy adventures dates back to at least the 1970s, when controversial animator Ralph Bakshi attempted 3 such ventures: Wizards, The Lord of the Rings, and Fire and Ice. From the Rankin Bass Studios, there were these notable features: The Hobbit, The Last Unicorn, and The Flight of Dragons. Even Disney tried their hand at the genre with their ambitious 1985 feature, The Black Cauldron. But few of these efforts succeeded in striking a chord with audiences. However, Record of Lodoss War was fortunate to do so, in part because it was riding on the coattails of a wildly popular campaign in Japan. You see, long before Record of Lodoss War, the anime series, came to be, it started off as a tabletop role-playing game, or TRPG for short. Perhaps the best place to start our journey is to meet the creative genius behind the world of Lodoss, Mr. Ryo Mizuno. Mr. Mizuno was born in Osaka, Japan on July 13, 1963. As a child, he was fascinated with monsters, and while in high school, Mr. Mizuno developed a passion for fantasy adventures, perhaps because, in his words, "I was attracted to the monsters in those stories. There were lots of fantasy monsters in Western mythology and folktales, so I really like those stories too." In fact, during his time in high school, Mizuno would often sketch stories about fantasy and adventure in bits and pieces to stave off boredom. After graduating high school, Mr. Mizuno would end up founding an organization of fellow gamers called Group SNE, and this company would develop a major interest in role-playing games. Now, at this time, which was roughly around the early 1980s, Dungeons & Dragons was taking the US by storm, but the RPG genre was almost unheard of in Japan. But 2 things happened in the mid-1980s which led to the popularization of RPGs in the land of the rising sun. 1, the successful launches of 2 now famous video games, Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy, both of which were modeled after a similar pair of Western computer RPGs, Wizardry and Ultima. The second occurrence, and the more relevant to our panel incidentally, was the creation of a new RPG system by Group SNE, one which would introduce the Japanese public to a different version of this genre. Thus, Record of Lodoss War was born in a 1986 issue of Japanese publisher Kadokawa Shoten's monthly Comtique magazine. Within this book were serialized RPG session logs, which document a playthrough of the TRPG. Now, the team at Group SNE borrowed, to put it loosely, these from the gaming systems of both Dungeons & Dragons and Tunnels & Trolls, modified, of course, to suit Japanese tastes. It's because of this that Record of Lodoss War is often compared to Dungeons & Dragons. This was followed 2 years later by a series of books called RPG Replay. These are also records of dialogues between the Game Master and players during game sessions. The replay books were meant to illustrate the concept of RPGs and explain the game rules for Lodoss, which were constantly evolving with each edition. But rather than recycling dated materials, Mizuno and Group SNE would actually replay the Lodoss campaign to generate new contents. Eventually, all the background information, plus a complete robust game system, would be compiled into sourcebooks in 1989, and these were called the Lodoss Companion Books. It wouldn't be long until Lodoss would become a pop culture phenomenon in Japan. For around the same period that the tabletop RPG series was riding its crest of success, Mizuno began work on writing novels, which formed the RPG session logs into a storyline spanning 15 years. In other words, these books were formed on account of Mizuno and his staff playing through the Lodoss campaign themselves multiple times. The first of these books, The Grey Witch, was released in Japan on April of 1988. It was an instant success and would, over the years, be followed by 6 other novels: Blazing Devil, The Demon Dragon of Fire Dragon Mountain, Parts 1 and 2, The King's Holy War, and The Holy Knights of Lodoss, Parts 1 and 2. Sadly, these books had been exclusively released in Japan. However, the first book of Record of Lodoss War, The Grey Witch, has recently been translated into English and is currently available from 7 Seas Entertainment. The book also contains a gallery of richly drawn illustrations supplied by Yutaka Izubuchi. Mr. Izubuchi has contributed similar pictures for Mr. Mizuno's books. The Grey Witch has also been adapted into a 3-part graphic novel series, which was actually translated into English by former New York anime distributor Central Park Media, with illustrations by Yoshihiko Oki. Four years after making its debut as a tabletop RPG, Record of Lodoss War would make another auspicious step. It would be translated to the screen in the form of a 13-episode OVA series. OVA stands for Original Video Animation, an animated production released directly to video. The 1980s and 1990s were a lucrative period for such productions in Japan, because many of these offered strong production values and skillful direction. The Lodoss OVA series, in particular, is renowned for its richly detailed artistry and use of color. The studio who produced the animation for this show was Madhouse Studios. Formed on October 17, 1972 by a quartet of animators, Madhouse is one of Japan's most prolific animation studios and have produced more than 230 works, movies, television shows, OVAs, you name it. Some of them are very familiar to anime fans, and chances are you might have seen some of their work without knowing who they are. Here's a brief sizzle reel of some of their productions. Now, I will confess that I do like some of their works better than others, but for those who feel strongly about them, I decided to include them in this video out of respect. some members from the Lodoss OVA staff, some of whom participated in the works I just showed you, as well as others. Illustrator Nobuteru Yuki was given the task of adapting Mr. Izubuchi's character designs for the show. He also serves as an animation director. Mr. Yuki has also done notable work on another classic fantasy anime series, The Vision of Escaflowne. And for you video game fans out there, he has also done the character designs for the cult classic Trials of Mana, recently translated into English and now available as a terrific 3D remake. Next we have Shigeyuki Hayashi, better known under his pen name Rintaro. He is one of Japan's most legendary animators and directors. One of his most notable accomplishments was Metropolis, based on Osamu Tezuka's manga of the same name, as you saw in the Madhouse video. In Record of Lodoss War, Rintaro provided storyboards for episodes 3 and 7. He has also done the animation for the prologue sequence at the beginning of the show. Akinori Nagaoka is the principal director for Record of Lodoss War OVA. Now this is a name that you may not recognize, but he has worked on some other productions, including Dragon Ball, Rose of Versailles, and even an animated feature based on the Diary of Anne Frank. Mr. Nagaoka has also directed the OVA episodes 1, 12, and 13, and provided storyboards for episodes 1, 4, 9, and 13. Add to the mix a beautifully orchestrated score by Mitsuo Hagita, beautifully detailed artistry, an earnest tone, and a pace that keeps one invested throughout, and you have all the ingredients for a beloved anime show.
And so the game begins.
Following a 3-minute intro, Record of Lodoss War's first episode, Prologue to the Legend, follows our 6 heroes as they travel the Dwarf's Great Tunnel. Along the way, they face gargoyles, traps, and finally, you guessed it, a ferocious, fire-breathing dragon. Thrilling as this episode is, it might not even be called a proper first episode at all. In fact, it was meant to provide audiences a taste of what to expect in the show, a sort of appetizer before the main course. On June 17, 1990, at Tokyo Setagaya Community Center, dozens of ecstatic Japanese fans gathered to witness a special premiere of the first episode. Mr. Mizuno himself, as well as staff members from the OVA, all greeted the audience prior to the showing. Response was enthusiastic. Following this, Episode 2, Blazing Departure, serves as the actual beginning to the story. So where does Episode 1 fit into all this? Well, if you want to be picky and watch the series in chronological order, one could sandwich Episode 1 in between Episodes 5 and 6, if you wish. Now here's where things get a bit more complicated. Episodes 1 through 8 are based on the first of the Lodoss novels, The Grey Witch. During this story arc, Parn, Diglett, and the others cross paths, rescue the fair Princess Fiona from Carla, and get into the graces of both King Fawn and King Cashin. The conflict builds to a fateful battle between two kings, former friends turned enemies. Finally, our heroes confront the Grey Witch herself in a stunning showdown where victory is by no means guaranteed. Following this, episodes 9 through 10 involves our heroes confronting the evil dragon Shooting Star at Fire Dragon Mountain, as well as Ashram in a race for the prized Scepter of Domination. In the thrilling final 3 episodes, Vognard kidnaps Diglett to sacrifice her eternal life force to resurrect Cardis, the goddess of destruction, and thus doom all Lodoss to devastation. Of course, Parn and his friends struggle to prevent this from coming to pass in a nail-biting climax that keeps viewers on the edge of their seats. The stories presented in episodes 9 through 13 are taken from the remaining novels, which, at the time, were not yet finished. and so they had to be compressed in order to provide this conclusion. One by one, all 13 episodes were released individually to video over the course of a year. The series was a huge success, so much so in fact that there was demand for more and more. But fans could never have guessed what would come next.
What I am about to tell you would have been revealed eventually.
7 years after the 13th and final episode of the OVA was released, an all-new series would be produced. A 27-episode television serial, Record of Lodoss War, Chronicles of the Heroic Knight. This show is produced by AIC Animation Studios, and as such, has a drastically different look and feel to its predecessor. It's not even a sequel to the OVA at all, but rather a remake of sorts, attempting to retell OVA episodes 9 through 13 as they were presented in the books. Episodes 1 through 8 of Chronicles, adapted from books 3 and 4, follows Parn and company as they go against both Ashram and Shooting Star, with noticeable continuity differences from its predecessor. For instance, in OVA Episode 8, Requiem for Warriors, Parn and his friends are attacked by two new characters, Shiras, a hot-headed mercenary, and Orson, a gentle giant who has lost all his emotions except rage. And when he sees Shiras in danger, beware. Following this confrontation, our heroes press on to Carla's castle. But in episode 1 of the TV series, Shiras and Orson are reintroduced, and meet Parn and Dietlet as if they have never crossed paths before. Naturally, this caused a lot of confusion from many viewers who were familiar with the OVA. After these first 8 half hours, episodes 9 through 27 follow books 6 and 7, focusing on Vagnard's attempt to resurrect Cardis. This time, he is after a new character, Little Niece, a young priestess whose body conceals the soul of Nanil, High Priestess to Cardis. Another new character, an aspiring knight named Spark, is the hero of this story, along with a cast of new companions. Here, Parn, Dietlet, Cashew, and Slain are reduced to supporting roles. At the end of each episode of Chronicles of the Heroic Knight is a rather unusual bonus of sorts. Welcome to Lodoss Island, a collection of 2-minute shorts which transform both the characters and world of Lodoss into a cartoonish comedy. Most of these episodes feature jokes targeted toward a Japanese audience, causing for some major difficulties when it came to translating them for English-speaking audiences. Chronicles of the Heroic Knight has received mixed reactions from both critics and viewers. Although there are fans of the TV series, others felt it didn't live up to the OVA, artistically or emotionally. However, both sides agree that Chronicles' biggest asset is the opening sequence which begins each episode. Aside from featuring the sort of style you would expect from Lodoss, this is underscored by a robust song provided by highly acclaimed Japanese composer Yoko Kanno. Even with these two series, there are still some fans who yearn for adaptations of books 2 and 5, which detail events that could potentially fill in the missing gaps, so to speak. I could tell you about them here, but unfortunately, that would involve spoilers. Perhaps someday I could make another video and tell you folks more about this. We've covered quite a bit of territory so far, but we're nowhere near done yet. As Slain would say,
there is still more distance to cover on our journey.
The American release of Record of Lodoss War deserves mention because it has some interesting stories of its own. Now, prior to being released in America, Japanese company Kadokawa Shoten put together a 5-minute international trailer with the intention of selling the video series to other countries. This trailer featured some temporary dubbed voices produced by an unknown studio in Japan. The English version that all American audiences are familiar with features a different cast of voices. Released in 1996 by New York-based Central Park Media, this dub was recorded at a studio you probably may not remember, National Sound Studios, which also dubbed a similar cult classic, Iria Zyram the Animation. This dub is notable for being the debut of two New York voice artists who would go on to become big names in the dubbing industry. The most recognizable name is Lisa Ortiz, often remembered as the voice of characters like Lena Inverse from The Slayers, Amy Rose in Sonic X, the title role in Animation Runner Kuromi, and many, many, many others. She also happens to be the current voice director for Pokemon. But it was the role of Diglett, her first, that would launch the beginning of a glorious career for Lisa. The story of how she got the role is one that she likes to tell at conventions. Her car was stolen by her brothers, and while searching for it, Lisa met a friend of hers who just happened to be working for Central Park Media. With a bit of encouragement, she was persuaded to audition. And that was how she got cast as Diglett. To this day, she remembers the role fondly, if partially because the first line that she utters in the show is,
Ew, it smells so moldy.
Lisa's performance as Diglett has drawn a lot of praise from critics and fans. Even one of the producers of Lodoss has been very complimentary of her turn. Ted Lewis is another name you might recognize. He can be heard in shows like The Slayers, Pokemon, Revolutionary Girl Utena, Yu-Gi-Oh!, and numerous others. Like Lisa, Ato was his first voice acting role. Lewis won the role of Ato by way of a chance encounter with another actor in a record store of all places who helped him get cast. And that actor is the man who both voices Parn and served partially as a voice director on the show, Bill Timoney. Interestingly, Bill almost didn't get to participate in Lodoss. Despite having been cast in certain dubs produced by Central Park Media, the staff, at least at first, figured that his voice wouldn't quite be right for the role. So how did he get cast? Well, he auditioned under an alias, Billy Reagan. And so he got the part. Amusingly too, the producers didn't find out who he really was until the recording sessions began. But another incident happened around that same time. Voice director Dave Siegel was called off to produce another project. Fortunately, the scriptwriter and producer, the late Michael Albin, suggested that Timoney, whom he had previously worked with on another project, step in as voice director until Siegel returned. It would be Timoney's first voice direction credit, and he did so for approximately the first half of the show. Sadly, he didn't get credited for his work because the credits had already been produced before the sessions began. Even so, Timoney still takes pride in being part of this dub, and rightly so. He has since gone on to do other voice work and has directed several other dubs, such as Gravitation, Genshiken, and one of his favorite projects, Gokudo, Swordsman Extraordinaire. But he still holds a soft spot for Parn, as it remains his favorite role. Here's another interesting story. Aside from voicing Parn and serving as voice director, Timoney also served as a casting director for the project with Sandra James. It was he who brought in many of the other voice actors to perform in the dub. Now, before I go any further, I need to mention the process of dubbing an anime from an actor's perspective. It's a very complicated process. One, you have to be able to time your lines to the mouth flaps on the screen, like this. Two, and more importantly, you have to be able to act. You don't want to come across as though you're simply reading lines or not even in context. Timoney was very experienced in both fields, but most of the other actors in the dub had to be trained to live up to the task. Fortunately, Timoney was gracious in coaching them to do both. Now, some of these actors listed here may not be familiar to you, but I personally feel that their work deserves a shout-out. I can't list them all, but here are some of the more notable ones. Gravelly-voiced Gregory Wolfe provides Gim with a gruff tone fitting for this character. Bill Timoney and Greg both knew each other from the off-Broadway theater group Manhattan Class Company, or MCC for short, which explains how Greg got cast. This would also be his first voice acting role. Incidentally, Greg and his brother James ran a theater group in New York City called Moonwork for many years. He can also be heard in Gokudo in a rather humorous role.
Does he honestly expect us to believe that he could ever act like a hero? He's living in a dream world.
A dream world? I think it's more like a nightmare.
Simone Grant is another notable addition to the cast of Lodoss. She portrayed the devilish voice of Carla, as well as the gentle priestess, Lelia. Her voice can also be heard in Gokudo and Boogie Pop Phantom. Sadly, this actress is not with us anymore, as she passed away about 15 years ago at the age of 44. Nonetheless, her voice still lives on in her accomplishments, Lodoss included. Interestingly, she was also married to Bill Timoney's brother, Mike, who got to have a voice on Lodoss as well in a brief cameo.
I will retrieve the princess, Your Majesty.
Tessius.
Broadway veteran and voice artist Bruce Wynand provides Vognard with both a chilling voice and a wicked laugh to match. He can also be heard as the heroic Captain Jebra in Episode 3. Bruce Wynand has stated that this was one of his favorite projects to work on. Ashram's voice artist, John Knox, expressed similar sentiments. Incidentally, he and Bill Timoney both met when they were background extras in a 1995 remake of the romantic comedy classic Sabrina. Both can be seen as cater waiters in the opening scene. Knox's deep, gravelly voice proved to be an ideal fit for the Black Knight. Also interesting, the late Rome Elliott, best known for his work in Genshiken, Gravitation, and Gokudo, has a brief cameo as one of Ashram's soldiers. Alexander J. Rose's silky smooth narration sets the stage for Lodoss at the beginning of each episode. He is also the voice of Wart. Shiras' voice actress, Karen Smith, was another talent that Bill Timoney brought into the cast. Although she hasn't made a lot of appearances in many dubs since Lodoss, she was recently brought out of retirement to play a part in an upcoming dub called Arya. But Shiras is, in my opinion, one of her most iconic roles. Pyrotess's voice is supplied by Meg Francis, who is in fact singer-songwriter Megan Carey. She has also worked as an actress and a playwright. Today she is at work on a project called the River Rock Project, which, by the way, I would highly recommend checking out. Megan provides a sultry, husky quality to this dark character, who is essentially Dietlet's evil counterpart. Another actress who deserves mention is someone who is not even credited for her work on the show. And that person is Eileen Kenning, who once did a 1997 television movie called A Child's Wish, starring John Ritter. Who does she play in Record of Lodoss War? This character, Liara, daughter of Zaxxon's mayor from Episode 2. It just goes to show that even a small role can have a significant story behind it. Interestingly, when Chronicles of the Heroic Knight was being dubbed, most of the cast for the OVA were able to reprise their roles, which was something that didn't happen for the Japanese version, as you see here with this chart. I'm going to give you folks a few minutes to take a look at it. Alright, and now to continue on, unlike the OVA, the Chronicles dub was produced at Headline Sound Studios in Irvington, New York. This time, Michael Albin would serve as both scriptwriter and director. Recording for the show took place for approximately a year. Unfortunately, production on the dub ran into some problems along the way. Viewers have noticed that several characters have had temporary or permanent voice actor changes at certain points of the show. Here's another chart which shows this. Just take a look at these characters and see how many times their actors were changed, temporarily or permanently. In particular, for 2 episodes, Dietlet was voiced by a different voice actress. The reason? Lisa Ortiz was sick and out of state at the time.
Hey, Parn. We haven't danced in a while.
Hey, Deed!
Refusing an invitation from a lady?
Similar and more tragic circumstances occurred with Lelia. Simone Grant was eager to reprise her role, but sometime during the recording sessions, the actress fell ill, and so she had no choice but to drop out. And so she had to be recast. Dancer Alyssa Bio portrayed Lelia from episodes 22 through 24, and then Megan Carey, who was already portraying Carla and Pirotess, as well as another character, the spunky thief Rhina, voiced her for the last 3 episodes.
Suppose that a man appeared who was able to kill the dragons, and suppose he claimed the governor's treasures for himself. What would you think then?
The new king has a whole new government to set up. We had to leave Cecil behind to help him.
This is where I felt them. The evil presence is strong, but it may be a trick. I just don't know.
But there were other reasons why Chronicles of the Heroic Knights dub suffered from a lot of voice changes. You see, around this time in the 90s, dubs for anime were mostly produced on shoestring budgets with tight production schedules, especially in the New York region. This meant that actors would only receive a small salary for their work on the show, which led to situations such as actors either finding a job which paid better rates, moving to Los Angeles where more voice work was available, or even quitting altogether. That, in addition to Central Park Media's tight deadlines, meant that delaying recording to accommodate an actor's availability would be impossible. Because of all this, Chronicles as dub also suffered from some performances that were rushed, leading to the dub being less well regarded than that of the OVA. Bill Timoney also recollects that while production on Chronicles as dub was beginning, he was living in Los Angeles. He was eager to reprise his role as Parn, even if it meant traveling back and forth to New York to do so. It provided him an opportunity to portray a more experienced, confident Parn, as opposed to his more reckless counterpart in the OVA. It would also be the last time that Bill would ever get to work with Mike Albin. Albin tragically died shortly after completing work on the Chronicles dub. For all its issues, though, Chronicles as dub does have its share of saving graces, and one of them is Crispin Freeman, who gets to voice 3 different characters in the show, 3 of them. He plays Spark, as well as a burly mercenary called Garrick, and a mischievous elfin character named Mar. In all 3 roles, Freeman shows off his vocal versatility and range. But it also led to situations where it seemed as though the actor was talking to himself. Despite the difficult production on Chronicles, Headline Sound would eventually go on to produce other acclaimed dubs for anime, including Boogie Pop Phantom, His and Her Circumstances, Comic Party, Gokudo Swordsmaster Extraordinaire, Shingu Secret of the Stellar Wars, The Third Girl with a Blue Eye, and Genshiken. Recently, they have been dubbing the Aria series, as well as Emma, a Victorian romance. Now, at this point, I'm going to give a brief shout-out to Mr. Michael Albin. Back in the 90s, some dubs would mostly take the subtitle script of an anime dub and use it as the dubbing script, which can often result in dialogue that sounds stiff and kind of stilted. Others would simply rewrite the script altogether and disregard the original meaning, which has often infuriated longtime fans. Mr. Albin, however, used a different approach. He made an effort to create a script that would not only match the mouth flaps, but also sound more fluent while remaining faithful to the original story. To this day, Bill Timoney remembers him fondly, as do many of the voice actors who worked with him. I know what you're thinking. Why all this information on the dub? Because, as mentioned, it too carries some interesting stories of its own. The 1990s were a rocky time for anime dubbing, because back then, anime still had a small following, and there were attempts that hadn't always been successful. However, there were still some noteworthy efforts during this period, and in my opinion, Record of Lodoss War OVA was one of them. Of course, dubs have come quite a long way since then, but I still hold a soft spot for this dub, as do a generation of fans who became introduced to anime during this period. But regardless of how you choose to watch Record of Lodoss War, it still manages to cast its spell no matter what. As mentioned, Record of Lodoss War's popularity in Japan went beyond being a simple tabletop RPG with books and 2 anime series. Audiobooks and dramatizations have been recorded for Japanese audiences. Graphic novels, or manga, were published based on the books that Mr. Mizuno has written. Among them are Lady of Faris, which serves as a prequel to the story of Lodoss War. Chronicles of the Heroic Knight, which is an adaptation of the 6th and 7th books, just like the TV series was. And then there's Diglit's Tale, a charming side story which focuses on Diglit and her relationship with Parn. This tale also features a moment between Parn and Diglit that viewers may wish could have been seen in either show. In addition, there were also video games. Yes, video games, each developed for different systems, like the Super Famicom system, Super Nintendo to us Americans, Turbo CD, Sega CD, Game Boy Color, and Sega Dreamcast. These video games were made exclusively for Japan. Only one of them, the Dreamcast game, has ever been translated. And today there are 2 video games in development. One of them is an online RPG known simply as Record of Lodoss War Online. Another is an upcoming adventure game where players can play as Diglit. It's called Diglit in Wonder Labyrinth. Currently, it's in development for PC, and hopefully it will be ported to other platforms as well. Isn't this fascinating for a series that initially started out as a tabletop RPG? In the years since Record of Lodoss War, there have been numerous anime productions which have dabbled in sword and sorcery. Aside from the vision of Escaflowne, there have also been wacky, comical entries like The Slayers, and of course Gokudo's Swordsmaster Extraordinaire. There have also been gritty, adult-themed ones like Berserk, as well as some popular favorites like Sword Art Online. Even so, Record of Lodoss War is still fondly remembered as a beloved classic, especially by old-school anime fans, myself included. And I personally have my own disclaimer to present. It was this series that truly converted me into an anime fan. Now granted, I had a bit of help already with being introduced to the works of Studio Ghibli, but as someone who is a fan of fantasy and who has grown up playing games like The Legend of Zelda and Final Fantasy VI, and even once read The Lord of the Rings, I never dreamed that I would encounter a series that seemed to speak to me. But Lodoss did just that, and I would never hesitate to recommend this series to anybody who is a fantasy fan. And incidentally, there's another major reason why I was so eager to take all of you on this journey with me. Because 30 years ago, Record of Lodoss War, the OVA series, was released to video. That's right, it's Lodoss OVA's 30th anniversary. And as you can see, there are many people here who have come to celebrate this special occasion.
Here we part company.
Indeed we do, for our adventure has come to an end, and with it, our celebration of Record of Lodoss War. I hope you found it very enjoyable and interesting, and that I've expanded your insights. I also want to give major thanks to Bill Timoney for being gracious to share a lot of his anecdotes of working on the show. I plan on doing several more virtual panels in the near future, and if you wish to know more about them, feel free to visit me on my Facebook page, where I'll post updates about them. And someday, when cons start again, I might be even able to present some of these panels in person at a con for real. But until then, this is John Turner saying, stay safe everybody, thanks for coming, and goodbye for now.
I'm sure our paths will cross again.